Hello, everyone, and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. My name is Matt Scott, and today I have the distinct honor and pleasure and privilege of being joined by none other than B.Monét. Just as we get started out in this conversation, I want to, pass it over to you to really introduce yourself and talk about who you are, at least, in short, because we'll really get into that as we go along.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where do I begin? I am a filmmaker. I also call myself an image maker because I'm trying to, I think, what would you say, expand the landscape and the interior worlds of people of color, predominantly Black and brown folks who I feel like don't necessarily have, positive or other stories being told about them on screen. So I'm very thankful to have gifts in that regard to be able to forward just our stories and the things that I feel like are not being told and in regards to us. I'm from Maryland. I'm here right now. It's very weird being in quarantine back in Maryland because I'm really bi-coastal. I bop back and forth between New York and LA a lot. I went to Spelman College, historically Black college in Atlanta, Georgia. Then went to NYU for grad school and have roots, in different places. Seems like I have a lot of roots in I would say cities that are with a lot of Black people because I love us, stand by us very much so. So yeah, I would say that's a little take on me.
Yeah, and just in case anyone is wondering, your background is from Bali.
Yes, we are in Bali, darlings. Yes, honey.
I love it. I love it. I think it's, yeah, I just wanted to mention that as we go along. But, there's a lot that you touched on there. And I think, I'm thinking about people who would be listening to this or watching this and what their frame of reference might be. And, it's almost unfortunate because I know you've been thinking about representation and identity for a long time. I've been thinking about that for a long time, even our whole lives, and but obviously it's a much, I hate to call it a hot topic, but it's a hotter topic than it was before. And so I'm glad that we could really dive in because I hope that one thing I try to do in these conversations is not focus on the obvious things and the things that you've possibly and probably addressed in other places and ways. And so let's get to the bigger picture of who you are in this conversation. One thing I want to start with though is, what is your origin story as a storyteller? Because you mentioned being from Maryland, so not too far from where I am in DC, of course, but I wonder how did you become a storyteller? Because I know that you studied English and you had a Master's of Fine Arts from NYU also. So you knew that was your path, but do you remember when you first realized, okay, I'm gonna tell these stories? And as part of that, did you realize that it was going to be stories around underrepresented people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've always known that I wanted to be a storyteller, even though I've deviated from the path, like in high school, I always looked up to Oprah and always wanted to be a journalist. And so I went really heavy into journalism and television production classes and was also part of the newspaper. So that was kind of like me always, I feel like from a very young age, wanting to start and be a storyteller. And I always was documenting. It's so interesting to just go back and look at your journey because I've always been documenting with my camera, with my little 35 millimeter camera.
Yeah.
And then the phones that have taken, I guess, heat over the years from a BlueBerry to iPhone, and just have always been documenting people and their stories. And I've always wanted to tell stories about the hopeless and the voiceless and just people who I feel like don't really get a chance to have their stories out there, and to almost bend the narrative, change and shift the narrative. That's always been really important to me. I guess that moment that I was like, I actually want to be a filmmaker and not a journalist is when I studied abroad in Italy. And I studied abroad in Italy my junior year at Spelman, and just kind of needed a little change in pace. And so that was also my first time, I think, also being back around such a diverse crowd, because I had been kind of in like a Black space for a little while. So it was just interesting to be traveling with these women, young women at the time, and to also see the class and the social difference. Like I couldn't always travel to different countries like they could. Like every weekend they'd be traveling and going to every place, but my parents were doing as best as they could to like let me have a very global experience. But you know, there were certain things that I just couldn't do. But I took a creative writing course, and my professor was like, you write like you're seeing the films. Have you ever thought about becoming a filmmaker and not a journalist? So I tell my parents this, and they think I've lost my mind. They're
I was
like,
like, is that where it's going?
yes, they're like, so you want to sign up to be a starving artist? That makes a lot of sense, you know. Because originally, like I told you, I was considering more so journalism and public policy. So it was just like, film, where'd this come from? Even though it's always kind of been, I've always been telling stories. So that was the moment that I knew that I was like, you know what, actually, I'm flirting with this idea, but let me actually do film. And I got into NYU, and I was just like, I guess it's meant to be. So. Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey ever since.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Like the thing that I'm curious about, because I've had similar conversations where people talk about. It's always really funny, but like their parents and what they think that they should have. Their parents and what they think they should have done, and and the careers they should do. Like, what did they expect you to do? I'm assuming they had an idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they just wanted me to have something stable. And because I studied English, you know, maybe become a teacher, or, you know, potentially law, because I've always been kind of like an activist and always have been really, really strong in my beliefs as it pertains to protecting folks who I feel like are marginalized and disenfranchised. So maybe law, maybe teaching, maybe journalism or public policy, but definitely not film, you know, like, like, no.
I guess that's not that far off. At least it wasn't like doctor or scientist or something like that. You're like, no, they knew that. What they knew that wasn't. Yeah.
Not me. I mean, I'm good at science, but math has never been. I mean, I know basic math, but like pre-cal and like
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And I think it's just interesting to think about how I guess the generation or generations before us have perceived what it means to be successful and make a living and to do all of that. But you've been successful in what you're doing. I think a lot of people would say that really. First of all, just to start there, to kind of jump from where you started to where you are now, like, are there certain accomplishments that you're most proud of in your journey? Yeah, I'd love to hear more about those.
Well, you know, it's funny because I made a short film called Q.U.E.E.N.
Right.
And it has dots in between. And for a long time, it didn't mean anything, but now it does.
Yeah.
And it means queens under extreme everyday negativity. And so that is Q.U.E.E.N. And so I made this film in film school, even though film school is a very racist, sexist, ageist, hostile environment for me. But I made something that I believed in. And that's what I was just telling a mentee yesterday, is like, when you make something that you believe in, you don't know what is going to come of it. And you don't know what the world is going to do with it in a way. Yeah. And so it still has had a very long lifespan. And I'm just so thankful for that. And, you know, it's crazy because last year, I was able to meet Queen Latifah and was able to work with her on a project that now is on BET. And that is, for me, one of the biggest accomplishments that I've had just in a short span of like doing filmmaking for, I guess it's really hard for me to quantify the number, but I know that it's been over 5 years, but not quite 10 years, but almost 10, which is just nuts. Because I don't know if I should count like high school or if I shouldn't count that time. It's just weird, but I would say that that has been like one of the best things, is working with her and like just seeing how big of a light she has. And like, she has such a big platform, but she has this program called Q.U.E.E.N Collective, and she's helping, you know, new women of color tell their stories and like get our short films on different platforms. So last year, me and the other filmmaker had our film go on Hulu, and then this year it was so nice that they had all 4 films. So our 2 films and then the 2 films from this year. So we all are on BET together. So it's just beautiful that, you know, she's doing the work, because I think a lot of celebrities don't necessarily do that, but she's not like that. So.
Yeah, and that's really positive to hear. And I think something that, just being mindful of who might listen. There are people who listen whose stories will resonate, right, with that experience and what you're saying, and they know completely what you mean by like, film school's a racist place, whereas there will be people who are shocked that this is the case. And I think there are also people, one thing I try to steer away from is that it can be difficult for people to like fully understand the struggle and the difficulty, and even the word that just came up is trauma, even, that comes for us along the way. I'm like raising our hands, because it's like, that's the reality. And I wonder, like, what are some, not to re-traumatize you.
No, it's fine.
What,
I don't
what
mind.
have been some of those struggles that, like, you feel that you face, that especially the ones that people wouldn't be, might be more surprised by?
Yeah, like, I mean, I was very young at the time coming into film school, one of the youngest people in my class. And the first film that I did was on Hottentot Venus, also known as Sarah Bartman. And she's the woman who, you know, basically was paraded around Europe. She had a large, you know, rear, a large, you know, buttocks and boobs and that kind of thing. And basically she was a freak show. And so that was my first film that I did in film school. So it was a mise en scène, without, basically it just means a film that doesn't have, I'm saying mise en scène, and I mean MOS, which actually quantifies to mean a film that basically is a silent film. So like the Charlie Chaplin, like a black and white film is what we had to do. And so that was my first film. So one of my classmates called me racist, never said it to my face. It got back to me though. I remember a professor he's passed and he's no longer with us, him embarrassing me in front of class. And, you know, at the time they were students from Tisch Asia. So it's no longer a campus from NYU. But he had students, there were students, I think they were visiting or something. They were in the class. So imagine like 50 plus people, and he calls on me. And he was just like, I really thought your MOS could have been better if you did this, and this in front of everyone. So things like that. Also having classmates, you know, treat me or mistreat me, talk behind my back. Never really see me as a filmmaker too. I think they just saw me as like some little kid. And maybe in the time, as I'm looking back, yes, I was very impressionable and I was young, but I still had my stories to tell. And so, you know, if it wasn't for the kids that I was teaching the summer that I was going into my second year in grad school, I probably would have just said, forget it, because it was such a hostile environment. I didn't feel like I had really any professors who were really looking out for me. And that's the thing, is a lot of these film schools don't ever have faculty of color who want to support the other students of color who are coming up. You know, I will say that there are a few professors that were great over my course at NYU, but I really felt like I was alone, you know, and that was even with having other Black students, you know, at the time in my class, but I really didn't feel like I had many allies. So it's interesting because film is a very collaborative medium, but yet I still felt like I had to be kind of like, I was in it alone. and that's kind of just been my experience, and why I tell films too. I tell stories about the pariahs of the world, because I kind of feel like a pariah. I feel like an underdog, because I feel like I'm not really supposed to be in this industry, but I am. And so my whole goal is also to bring the people who don't necessarily get a chance to be seen on screen and behind the scenes. I'm like, I'm doing this for you. Let's do this together. So it's really important for me that the sets that I'm on be representative of the world, that they be Black, that they be brown, that they be representative, diverse, queer, trans. Like, that's the world that I live in and I choose to live in. So I want that to be on and off the sets. But it's just very interesting. There's such a big push now. And I hate, getting calls like, oh, we're looking for a Black female director. And I don't even like that term. Like, call me a Black woman director. Well, it would be great if you just called me a director.
Right.
But, because you have to quantify and you have to give me a title. Okay, but let it be a woman. I just don't like the female aspect, because I don't know. You're never telling a male director, well, we're looking for a white male director. Like, what? Right. You're looking for a director, because that's the standard. It's just very, I could go into that so much, but it's so annoying.
And even to clarify, because I totally get that. It's not for anyone who might be listening who doesn't even fully get that. It's like, as people could tell, as I could even tell, like, obviously there's so much pride and love for who you are and your identities, but at the same time, it's like, I just want to be able to, I'm here to be the best at what I'm doing, or to create the art that I'm creating. I'm not here to create the art that I'm creating or be the best for my identities, And so I think it's an interesting mix, but what you made me think about with just that story of what you've experienced is just, even in my life, how much I feel like, to that point of being the best, it's like, I feel like because of that discrimination, because of all of those things that we know could come up, people say it all the time, but we have to be that much better at what we're doing. But I think to kind of take a step back, even to something you were saying around Queen Latifah, how did you manage to get to where you are today in light of all of those different challenges that normally exist for, I guess I don't want to say normally, that always exist for I don't even want to specifically say Black people and Black women, but for people who are underrepresented and who are on the margins.
Yeah, I'm always telling people, you need to work your behind off. It's not enough for you to just be a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people at these different film schools who are so talented. Mega talented, but you can't expect for someone to just cherry pick you and then, you're all good. Or even if you go to a Sundance or a Tribeca, okay, there are plenty of people who go to these prestigious film festivals, but then what do they do next? Or do they have their next project lined up? So my whole thing is, it's not performance, it's like pie. It's not performance or image, but it's exposure. So I knew that a lot of, quantifying a lot of the success that I've had comes from exposure. It comes from me almost being my own publicist and being like, okay, I have to get out there. I have to get my work out there, because I don't have the same access that Billy or Sally has. I don't have, I didn't grow up in film. I don't have a producer dad or, a cinematographer mom or whatever. I had to literally work my tail off. So a lot of this has come from a lot of networking, a lot of putting myself out there, putting my films out there. And I think a lot of people who are not naturally, I don't want to say introverted, because you can be introverted and still know how to network. But I think people who don't innately like networking will not like this business, because a lot of it is people time. It's a lot of talking to people. It's a lot of visibility. It's a lot of people needing to see who you are. And so a lot of it has come from you know, volunteering at events, being a PA on a feature film, being a being a key PA on an indie feature that had very low budget and didn't treat me very well, being on something like a Bird Box, Bird Box in LA, like being on all these types of different things, I think help to like get you out there because you're meeting all these different types of people. Filmmaking, again, is not done alone. So you have to put yourself out there. So I think it's also like going back to what I was telling you about my family. I also wanted them to feel like I'm taking this seriously. So a lot of me applying to film festivals and applying to contests was, I think, proving to them and proving to myself that I deserve a seat at the table just like anyone else. And I'm going to keep on trying to like prove, quote unquote, that I deserve to be here. So I've won a lot of things over the years, not out of help, not out of my own help, out of my own health, but I would say, I've done it because I want to have a seat and I want people to be like, this Black woman is really, she deserves a shot, And so I know that if I were white, things would be different. I've won so many things, and it's not just because I want to, but it's because it's like I almost have to just to, get a commercial job or to get the opportunity with, Queen Latifah. Like, I know that it's easier for brands to kind of sell me because I've had a lot of experience with working with her, with working with Reese Witherspoon, with working with these A-list celebrities that, some Black directors have not been afforded. And so because I've had those experiences, it makes it easier for sometimes the larger demographic to take me in. But it's annoying because it's like I have a whole list of like literally 25 names of Black, brown, queer, white, Asian women and men all on this list, have sent it out to production companies, have sent it out to executive producers. And they're just like, well, sorry, like I see that they've done a short film, but they can't do a commercial. How come? They literally did 12 minutes of a film, or if not more, but you won't let them do 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And that's where it gets so tricky, because especially commercials, that space can be very unimaginative. Along with film and television too, can be very like, it's almost like the woman who directs the blue nails is the woman who gets the job. God forbid if you have the pink nails, because you can't direct the blue nail job. That's how unimaginative it can be.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about, because when you even talk about commercials, like, I mean, there's so many, one thing I think that's so interesting for me about media, like, I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like I grew up, well, obviously taking in a lot, and then the internet even put more on our plates. But I've been talking with people recently about how much time I spent growing up watching reality TV, and watching like reality TV that was like definitely not age appropriate is how I've been putting it to people, where it's like, but you're seeing all these dynamics play out. And I always thought that was interesting. But as I got older, I think the part that I started to really understand more is like, okay, they're like, not necessarily that there are formulas to how it's all put together, but there are a lot of, if you pay attention, if you do the learning, there's a lot of similarities across it. And there's a lot of hesitation to do something that is outside of the box, even within that space. So something I've seen a lot of has been around different shows, but just the lack of diversity in casting. Because one thing that happens with that in a reality TV sense is that a lot of people, what happens, because these are often competitions, the Black people or people of color or queer people get voted out first, and then people are like, why does this happen? So I'm glad that people are starting to have more of that conversation, but I wonder what does that conversation, has the conversation changed, or what has that conversation looked like really over the last month since the police murders of George Floyd and all the Black Lives Matter protests, and everyone who's speaking out you know, whether it's a various degrees of care and consideration. But yeah, what does that look like in your part of the world, I'll say, or in your industry?
Yeah, I mean, because I've been doing a lot of commercials and branded content lately, with like the last 2 years of my life, it's just very interesting to get a lot of calls in the last 2 weeks, or a lot of emails. We're looking for a Black female director all of a sudden, you know, and it just makes me feel some type of way a little bit, because it's like, well, where were you 6 months ago? Where were you a year ago, 2 years ago? But all of a sudden you can find me. So that means that you can find other people who look like me too. So it's just a very divisive thing, because it's like, you know, like I'm up for a job right now and everyone on the call is white, but yet you want, you know, it to be a diverse campaign. And yet I'm the only spot of color.
Yeah.
And that's not wrong to you. You know what I mean? Because the talent, of course, will be of color. But then what happens in terms of behind the scenes? Who's the DP? Who's the gaffer? Who's the editor? Like, you know what I mean? Like when we start getting into department heads, it's still a very white thing. And I think that Hollywood is still not really willing to shake up things fully. I think I mean, if I get one more email from one of the things that I have bought something from, saying we support Black lives. No, you support the Black dollar. Let's be clear. That's what you really want. You just want to make sure that you put this little lip service post that says we support Black lives, and okay, so can we move on, basically? Because if it really were a part of the fabric of your makeup, you wouldn't have to do that. We would know based upon your principles and your policies and who you're hiring, whether or not you truly support the lives of Black people and brown people. So
Yeah.
it's so, I don't know, because it makes me think, you know, Hollywood, how am I going to figure this out? How do I navigate this?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I have a lot of mentees, but I can't say that I necessarily have a lot of mentors. And I think that there's this thing of like, it's hard to find also other, I think, people who look like you, who want to like help you, who are steps ahead, because it's a competitive thing. And they're like, well, I don't want to help you, because it's either me or you, and it's either feast or famine. And to me, I'm more collective thinking of like, no, let us all band together so we can literally, as Issa Rae says, like network across, so that you're bringing everyone that you know with you. And I just don't get this whole like, not this crabs in a barrel syndrome that just is gonna do nothing for our race, not just in Hollywood, but if we don't get on this collective mindset, I hate to see sometimes the future of like, what does that really look for homogenous Black people, you know?
Yeah,
So.
it makes me think though about, it's just interesting that even when you just think of identity as one thing that you know, I'll say that we have in common, but also that different groups have in common. It's interesting that so many different experiences resonate, because one thing I think about and have thought about a lot lately, as someone who is not only putting out social change content into the world, but specifically like putting out film content that's focused on social change, or starting to do that really, is that like one thing, and I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts if this sparks anything for you, but one thing that's so that I found difficult is that we are so complex, like beyond just like skin color, but even that, like even just starting with your skin color, like that leads to so many different experiences and things that I personally believe make us better people, but like not then someone else, but just better for, you know, at the end of the day. There's a lot of difficulty, and I used the word trauma before with a lot of that too, but it means that we bring something different to the table. And so like it's hard, if not impossible, to look at a sheet of paper and see here is what we fully are. And so I wonder from your perspective, again, as a storyteller, like, how have you managed to communicate about who you are and what you are and all of that stuff and what you're creating even in a way that actually gets across? Because a lot of people just don't get it, you know? You're
Yeah,
like figuring it out.
that's a really great question. Really great question. Wow. Yeah, I think I'm still wrestling with that actually. I don't know if I've arrived at it, but I think it's just kind of like a lifelong question that I'm trying to answer with my work, because there, you know, I'm only here for X amount of years and I can only tell X amount of stories, but I'm going to do them as best as I can, you know. And I think it's always been that I want to tell stories about people who I just feel like aren't being seen on screen in an authentic and tangible and humanistic way. I'm not saying that they can't be flawed, but it's just so important to me that they're rich in the colors that you see of them on screen. When you watch a film like Killer of Sheep, you get that. When you watch Moonlight, you get that. I want to make stuff like that, you know, that's so nuanced and so complex. And that's the type of stuff that I want to do. But it's difficult when, again, I'm not made of money and a lot of the gatekeepers are still white and financiers. So it's still like, how do you operate in a system that is inherently capitalistic, anti-Black, and how do you maneuver through that? And I think I'm still figuring out ways to do that. Thankfully, I do have a camera. So that has been one of my, because I say that I'm a rapper with a camera, you know, you know, I'm releasing my mixtape. My mixtape are, you know, that's my films. So, and my friend is originally the one who said that, Elegance Bratton, who is amazing in his own right and is a queer filmmaker. And, you know, I don't know. I don't know if I quite have the answer to that, but I know that I'm searching. I know that I'm listening, and I'm making stuff that is about us and for us and by us. And I wish that more folks would get it, because, you know, Viola Davis just said in an interview that she wished that she didn't do The Help because she felt like she was betraying her race. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's what she was saying in this article. I think it was on Shadow and Act the other day. And, you know, it's that kind of thing of like, how do we have less of that be the rhetoric of what we're doing? How do we be proud of the stories that we tell? And how do we, especially with people who have public platforms who are Black, how do you support Black filmmakers? Not just the lip service, but how do you actually champion their work? How do you produce it? Because a lot of this is money. It all comes down to money. And whoever doesn't have it will suffer, you know, because of it. Not just in film, but in life. And so to me, it's like, how can there be more Black producers, more Black financiers who can really be at the helm of championing our work? Because if not, we're still begging on the door, asking, you know what I mean? Will you take a shot? You know, I was very disappointed because a script that I've been working on for a really long time, someone, I won't say the name, but, you know, it's just interesting that, you know, he has this award that is to help women, but yet you won't help me, a woman, a Black woman, a young Black woman at that, trying to do her first feature. And it's just interesting because he said to my managers, I don't think I'm the right person for it. Okay, but yet you have this thing, you have this award that is to help female filmmakers, but I don't know, it's perplexing. And that's why I've never taken real estate in the things that other people have. So yes, I went to a prestigious school. Yes, I've been to Sundance. Yes, I've been to Tribeca. Yes, I've been in these spaces. But at the same time, I think you have to think almost independently if you are a creator of like, I'm a move in this industry, but I also have to like be outside of it. I still have to have a life. I still have to um, find ways to create outside of this system that wants to render my soul.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the other piece I would just add on top of that, because that's so powerful, is that there's there's so much around how we're perceived, and how people who are underrepresented are perceived, that just permeates, the whole culture, to the point where, like, there are even times where you could have a conversation with, or what I'll say for me, like, where I've had conversations with other Black people, and most of the time I feel like there's all the support, but even then there are just all of these perceptions of what we are and what we could bring to the table that I think affect everybody, even ourselves, which I think ties in with imposter syndrome at times. And when I think of, the Black and brown filmmakers I see, the queer filmmakers I see, the people who are especially living at those intersections and working at those intersections, I'm always amazed, because I realize how much struggle it is to be able to just like show up, first of all, on top of all of the hatred and like forms of violence. It's just stacking it on top of each other. And so, I think it's impressive. What I want people to be able to understand and see that, and then hopefully, to your point, they're able to look at creators and filmmakers and storytellers of different sorts who are Black, Black especially, because I say that because for some reason it's like there's always that difference for Black people and other people of color, and but I hope that people will be able to look at us and see possibility and see money and see potential and see all of those things that they're looking for, because it does leave, I can relate to that feeling of scratching my head like, what am I missing? Like, I'm a perceptive person. I thought that I understood. I thought that this was a perfect fit, and maybe I'm missing something. And I think a lot of that is just discrimination and hatred and racism and all of those things. But I think the beauty of it is that, like, to focus on kind of where things are, and why I wanted to talk to you. You are creating, you're building a beautiful future. You're telling stories that matter and resonate with people. I think even with Q.U.E.E.N, I just want to mention too that I did a lot of sexual assault activism, and to be able to do, I actually think a lot of that was inspired in my high school years by other stories and portrayals of that in the media, because I was like, what is this? I had no clue about that. And then when I saw those stories, whether shows and other things that kind of taught me, I was able to engage more, and then engaged really deeply in that work. And so I appreciate you doing that. But I think we could go on forever, but I know we have our lives to live. And I think, thinking about all of this, it's a lot to digest. And I think one thing I'll say is that it's hard to end on a happy ending for this, just because there is a lot that needs to be fixed. But I think there's also a lot of beauty in understanding, more of your perspective. And I hope that people will feel better about that, and just feel like they understand some of the problems that need to be addressed too, but also some of the beautiful things that are already being created and happening. But just as we wrap up, I need to ask my favorite question, really. If your life were a book or documentary, especially thinking of the vision of your life or where you see it going, or of where you've been, what would the title of that be and why?
Wow, that's such a great question too. Oh my God. Wow, I don't know. I feel stumped. What would it be titled? God.
It's a big question. And as you think about that, I'll say I feel like I get this reaction almost every time. And because it's a big thing to think through, would the title of your book or documentary be? I'm sure you would have a documentary. I know that.
I don't know. I feel like,
I'm guessing.
I think it'd be a book, and
Oh,
it'd be called Who Am I? Dissecting the Truth. And that's me, like
wow.
me literally being a truth teller and a truth seeker, and trying my best to seek more knowledge out of this life and trying to get better, trying to learn, trying to listen, trying to forgive, trying to heal, trying to step in the gap, you
Yeah.
know, and even when I'm in the gap, sometimes not always, but listening, because
Yeah.
God gave us 2 ears and not and only one mouth. So I think it would be something to that realm, because I feel like I've lived so many lives,
Yeah.
and I'm not even like 50 yet or whatever. And so I'm just interested to see also what, God, universe, and ancestors has for my life and
Yes.
what that all entails. Hope I live very long. We'll
Yes.
see.
Yeah.
But I'm here now, and I'm taking it all in. And I would say that this year feels very much like a rebirth for everyone,
Mhm.
having to kind of like cut the dead ends, that no longer serve us. And so I'm hoping that this year, although it's been very crazy, that we can still take away the beautiful gems, that are here, for our lives. So
I like that. Cool stuff.
yeah.
And I mean, one question I want to ask, which I'll ask both my questions to you, so you could kind of maybe the first we can mull over for a second, but I definitely want you to share where people could follow you and just follow your journey. But I am curious, as we wrap up, who would write the foreword of that book of Dissecting the Truth? If you had some, oh,
Oh,
another one. Spend time with it. Spend time with it.
well, she's deceased now,
Oh yeah.
but I love Maya Angelou. I
Woo!
love Maya. She is Mama Maya. Woo!
Yeah,
Woo! Grab the dreams. Yes, honey.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I love that, and I appreciate that. And I think, yeah, just as we wrap up, where could people learn more about you or follow your journey?
Sure. I hope that you got all of that. I
Yeah,
feel like I'm getting calls, so I'm like,
no worries.
uh.
I got it.
People can find me on Instagram at direct her B.Monét. You can find me on Twitter. I'm not a big Twitter person, but trying to get more into it. But I'm B.Monét official there. And on Facebook, you can find me, B.Monét also, uh, the fan page, and you can send me a message on there. So
Awesome. And
yeah.
as we wrap up, I'll just say, as we could tell by you've gotten a couple of calls during this. B is a woman in high demand, and call her now. Don't call her if you're looking for her to be your Black woman director. Call her because she's probably the best, definitely the best director I've interviewed. So thank you so much for taking the
Oh,
time out. And
thank you so much.
as I say at the end of all of my interviews, keep impacting.